I will get straight to the point. The average U.S. citizen is angry. They do not believe that they are receiving a fair share of our economic output, and I feel they are justified in that belief. They also believe that no political party is properly addressing their concerns. As a result, their anger causes them to favor populist politicians whom they believe will break things until their needs are met. Their anger certainly helps explain the result of the 2024 U.S. presidential election. My fear is that we will have more elections like that one, and perhaps worse, until we address this issue. Fortunately, there is a straightforward solution to this problem. We, the people, must embrace a simple idea. The idea that paid work is not the only legitimate way to receive our rightful share of income. The other way to receive income is by simple inheritance. Inheritance, you ask? How is that possible? We don't all come from rich families. Actually, we do. And it is the purpose of this video and of this entire video channel to introduce you to the technological inheritance argument for universal basic income, or UBI. That argument will show you why every citizen has a right to a basic income by simple inheritance. You will see how this argument overcomes all reasonable objections to a UBI and is easily the strongest argument for it. But before we get to that point, let's be sure we are all talking about the same thing by reviewing our definition of UBI. A universal basic income is a regularly scheduled cash payment made to all adult citizens of a country, regardless of the recipient's wealth, income, or employment status. For more detail on the ideas behind that definition, see the video shown below. A pointer to that video and all others mentioned within this video is pinned above the comments section. So let's get started. In summarized form, the technological inheritance argument says the following. Number one, we live in a modern economy in which over 80% of our GDP is not the result of the efforts of any individuals or companies. It is produced instead by the value-creating power inherent in the knowledge and technology and in the physical, educational, legal, and even military infrastructure that society has accumulated over centuries. Number two, that societal heritage is in the public domain. In other words, we, the people, own it, and the value it produces belongs to all of us by simple inheritance, by birthright. And number three, as a result of that ownership, society has every right to require the payment of a royalty or user fee whenever a private enterprise uses our societal heritage in the creation of commercial value. Those payments would then fund a universal basic income. More recently, I have been attracted to a different way to say the same thing. It goes something like this. Just because a business owner can buy a machine that enables him to replace human workers, that does not mean that all of the value created by that machine belongs to that business owner. Since that machine could not and would not exist without the use of our societal heritage, a portion of the value it creates belongs to the people. Now, claims about our ownership of this societal heritage and the value it creates are certainly unconventional. So, let's see how we can justify those claims. Consider this diagram. It shows the real per capita U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP, for the period from 1900 to 2000. We see that real economic output per person in the United States, as measured in constant 2012 dollars, grew from approximately $6,300 in the year 1900 to over $46,000 in the year 2000. This is more than a sevenfold inflation-adjusted increase over the course of the 20th century. How did we achieve this increase? Are we all working 7 times harder or longer than we did in 1900? Of course not. In fact, there is ample evidence to show that the average worker in the year 1900 actually worked about 20 hours per week longer than their counterpart in the year 2000. Remember, the 40-hour work week did not become official in the U.S. until 1940. The simple truth is that we achieved that extra output by taking advantage of the accumulated knowledge, technology, and infrastructure that our modern society possesses. To help in understanding the value-creating power of that societal heritage, consider what today's economy would be like without the items on this list. All of those items came into prominence in the 20th century and were absolutely essential to the increase in our productivity. For the same amount of individual effort, these items contribute to at least a sevenfold increase in output per person. And that does not even consider the increases due to advances in all of the centuries both before and after the 20th century. In his last public lecture in the year 2000, Herbert Simon, an award-winning computer scientist and Nobel laureate in economics, said the following, and I have summarized his actual quote for conciseness. Consider the income that you now receive as a member of American society and compare it with the income that you would receive if you were an equally hardworking member of a third world nation. For most of us, the difference between the two incomes would be at least 10 to 1. Therefore, if we are very generous with ourselves, I suppose we might claim that we earned as much as 1/5 of the income we receive. The rest is patrimony, associated with being a member of an enormously productive social system, which has bestowed upon us this generous allotment of unearned income. I have added the capital letters and red colored on the word unearned for emphasis. In other words, this quote says that over 80% of our economic output is due to the fact that our societal heritage creates value on its own. Only the remaining 20% or less of our output can be attributed to the efforts of individual people. Another quote illustrates this same idea. American businessman, investor, and billionaire Nick Hanauer said the following in one of his TED Talks. If I had been born somewhere else, not here in the United States, then all of my efforts might very well have resulted in nothing more than me being just some dude standing barefoot beside a dirt road selling fruit. This evidence and these quotes provide clear support for the technological inheritance argument and for the claim that over 80% of our GDP is created by our publicly owned societal heritage. That portion of GDP belongs to the people by simple inheritance. But then that situation raises a fundamental question. Why don't we already have a UBI that is funded by the royalties or user fees paid by those who create commercial value through their use of our societal heritage? Of course, we all know that patent law allows recently developed knowledge and technology to be owned by individuals and corporations for a limited time. During that time, patent owners have the right to charge a royalty whenever their intellectual property is used. When patents expire, all of those rights enter into the public domain. In other words, we, the people, own all intellectual property that is no longer covered by patents. But then we must ask, why do royalty payments stop just because patent rights enter the public domain? In other words, How did we arrive at the current situation, in which it is simply assumed that public domain knowledge, technology, and infrastructure can be used by anyone and at no charge? I believe that happened by default for the following reasons. Number one, for most of history, economic output was created primarily by human labor. The part due to our societal heritage was often just too small to warrant the effort needed to consider it separately. While that heritage contributes a far larger share today, we simply have not yet chosen to rethink this relationship. Number two, enterprises that used our societal heritage often needed our labor. Since the resulting jobs paid wages that enabled us to claim a share of economic output, those jobs could be considered a form of payment for the use of our heritage. And last but not least, when enterprises receive considerable value from their free use of public domain property, they then have considerable incentive and means to resist any demands that they pay for that use. Of course, it is very satisfying to the egos of business owners and wealthy individuals to claim that every penny in their pockets is due to their hard work and astute management. In addition, if they can successfully push back on claims that, quote, you didn't build that, end quote, then they can keep that money in their pockets. I contend, however, that in today's economy, the amount of unpaid use of our societal heritage has reached unacceptable levels. After all, if at least 80% of our GDP is due to that heritage, then item number one is obviously no longer true. As for item number two, automation and artificial intelligence have already disrupted the creation of the type of jobs that used to offer a living wage for everyone who needed work. For more evidence on that subject, I suggest the video shown at the bottom of this slide. And as for item number three, it is simply well past time to push back and insist on proper payment for the use of our public domain property. Now, let's spend a little time examining what a universal basic income will accomplish. In general, it does the following. It will eliminate poverty overnight by raising everyone above the official poverty threshold. It will create an increased sense of community by declaring that every citizen has a right to an equal base income. It will go a long way toward eliminating unjustifiable income and wealth inequality. And it will diffuse many of the grievances and much of the financial desperation that prompt people to favor populist politicians. And in particular, the technological inheritance argument offers these additional powerful advantages. Number one, it explicitly acknowledges who truly owns most of the output of our economy and sweeps aside all claims that a UBI is just free money or a handout or welfare. It is none of those things. It is our birthright. This also removes the stigma of receiving income from a source other than paid work. Number two, it shows that a UBI will not be funded by taking hard-earned money from one person or group and giving it to those who some believe are working less hard or not at all. The money for a UBI was not earned by any person or group. It was earned instead by the value-creating power of society's accumulated knowledge, technology, and infrastructure, our societal heritage. Number three, the technological inheritance argument eliminates the need for and relevance of basic income pilot programs. Those pilots were run under the assumption that a UBI would be funded by taxpayers. For that reason, we felt a need to show that a UBI accomplished enough good to justify the sacrifices made by those taxpayers. However, since a UBI is, in fact, paid for by our societal heritage, and not by taking someone's hard-earned money in taxes, such justification is simply unnecessary and irrelevant. Number 4, it puts to rest the concern that recipients will just quit working and do nothing. Basic income pilot programs have been good for one thing. They showed no significant evidence that a recipient will leave a worthwhile job. The vast majority of people want a lifestyle for themselves and their families that requires more than a basic income. But more importantly, a UBI is an inheritance. It does not come with strings attached. If you spend it legally, it is no one's business what you spend it on. That includes using it to quit work. Number 5, the technological inheritance argument shows that a UBI can be funded without deficit spending. A UBI will cost less than 20% of GDP. Since the public owns at least 80% of GDP, there will be more than enough money available. For more detail on what a UBI will cost in the United States, see the video shown at the bottom. Number 6, it shows that we don't have to establish a need for a UBI in order to justify it. The justification comes from the fact that a UBI is simply our rightful inheritance. That is why we need not and must not wait until automation and AI have increased the need for a UBI by causing significant unemployment and disruption. We are entitled to a UBI now. Number 7, the technological inheritance argument actually gives us reasons to celebrate advances in automation and technology. Those advances will increase our productivity, and the money available for our UBI will increase proportionally. And finally, the technological inheritance argument makes each citizen aware that for decades, much of their rightful share of GDP has actually been going into the pockets of business owners and their investors, and thereby contributing to unjustifiable increases in wealth and income inequality. The resulting anger will be crucial in the coming political battle to establish a UBI and end this inequity. Now, before I go any further, I should briefly address a question that occurs to many at this point. If we, the people, own 80+% of the economy's means of production, isn't that just socialism? That is a fair question, and in fact, I have created a separate short video to answer that question more fully. The title of that video is shown below. The short answer, however, is simply no. Unlike the situation in actual socialist countries, entrepreneurs and their investors are still free to own and operate their companies in any legal manner that maximizes their profits. However, they also need to pay for their use of our societal heritage, just like they pay any other supplier. Now, I would be remiss if I failed to point out that the technological inheritance argument is not, by any means, original with me. It appears in the article and book by Professor Alperovitz shown here. Pointers to those sources are pinned above the comments section of this video. I highly recommend both as an introduction to this idea. Once you are familiar with this idea, you will recognize that it also appeared over 200 years ago in one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Paine. All accumulation, therefore, of personal property, beyond what a man's own hands produce, is derived to him by living in society, and he owes on every principle of justice, of gratitude, and of civilization a part of that accumulation back again to society from whence the whole came. And finally, I will end with the following powerful statement from the article by Professor Alperovitz. I have paraphrased a bit of it for conciseness. The idea of providing people with income as a matter of right, whether or not they do what society considers work, runs into age-old concerns about individual responsibility, as well as endless arguments about political and economic equity. Until these concerns are confronted, progress toward any form of basic income is highly uncertain. A good starting point, however, is to point out the simple reality that most of what we all receive as income far exceeds what anyone can claim as the result of the work they actually do in the here and now. Once this fully documented reality is understood, the moral case for a basic income for all becomes very different from conventional understandings. Once again, I thank you for your attention to this important topic. Please consider leaving a comment. I read them all. Of course, one video cannot address all of the questions that arise within this topic. Please see the other videos in this channel for more information. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel and pressing the like button so that this important topic will be recommended to a wide audience.